Hello and welcome. I'm Riz Khan. My guest today is someone who's turned controversial conversations on issues such as the woke culture into an art form. The renowned evolutionary behavioral scientist Dr. Gad Saad pulls no punches as he fights for what he believes should be universal truths and real freedom of speech. His best-selling book, The Parasitic Mind, explores how the human thought process can be hijacked by irrational ideas and how these parasitic beliefs shape much of modern society. Professor Saad's upcoming book is called Suicidal Empathy, exploring how excessive compassion for harmful ideologies is threatening much of Western society. Well, his impact and presence on social media has earned him the friendship and support of people such as the world's richest man.
I found him to be incredibly engaging, very, very humble, zero ego, just two guys. We literally hugged, sat there for 4 hours, completely locked in. You know, he was confiding in me in a very trusting way, in a very intimate way. So I thought he was just absolutely lovely. I mean, he is an eccentric guy, but I've got nothing but positive affection for him.
And Professor Saad has welcomed Donald Trump's second presidency as an opportunity to turn the tide on woke culture and to boost freedom of speech. I caught up with him in his hometown of Montreal in Canada for a candid conversation covering a number of controversial ideas that he's put forward. In this, the first of 2 episodes, Dr. Saad explains what he sees as the real danger of the parasitic mind, his abhorrence of what he calls social justice warriors, and how he justifies his position.
I am putting the epistemological noose around your neck. I don't have to emote louder than you. I don't have to scream louder than you. If I can have this, gargantuan triangulation of evidence, I'll let that do the talking for me.
Professor Gad Saad, technically, but Gad Saad, I'm glad you could spend some time with me for this conversation. There's so much to talk about. I guess I should start by asking, which pronouns would you prefer I use for you?
He, they.
Happy to do that. Now, you've written so many books, you've written a number of books, I should say, that really look at the human condition from a number of angles. I'm going to go through a couple of those down the road, but let's start with The Parasitic Mind, because that's the one that really got you out there. And having been through it, I don't know, one sense I got was that you seemed almost angry or frustrated with the way society has gone. Was it essentially a vent?
I mean, in a sense, yes, because having been in academia for for 31 years now, I always tell people I faced 2 great wars in my life. The first one was the Lebanese Civil War, growing up in Lebanon. The second one was the war on reason, on logic, on common sense, on reality that I saw on university campuses. And I just couldn't understand how supposedly intelligent people could be parasitized by such nonsense. And so it was really a result of me having stood at the top of the mountain, screaming into the wind, nobody paying attention to me. Eventually they paid attention with The Parasitic Mind.
Isn't a best-selling book in its own way an infectious idea?
It is. So in the mimetic sense, so if you remember, Richard Dawkins famously wrote a book in 1976 called The Selfish Gene. In that book, he argued that, of course, humans are a biological animal, but also a cultural animal. Our genes spread, but so do our memes, which is packets of information. So when you're reading my book, I am literally infecting your brain with my ideas.
Now, you state in the book that people should proactively judge, not just judge simply to be politically correct. Where does that leave someone like me? I'm an old school journalist, and it was kind of beaten into me years ago as I trained that I should not take a position, that I should not be involving myself in the story with adjectives or a commentary or an opinion. All that's changed now in the media, as we know, but I'm kind of stuck in that world. Where does that leave me, where I don't want to be in an argument with you screaming and shouting that you're right or wrong? I just want to hear your opinions,
right,
and let people decide.
So in your case, if you're wearing your hat as a journalist, then perhaps not judging is the right ethos to invoke. But in my case, if I am a creator of truth and a defender of truth, then by definition, I have to judge, right? I mean, I belong to the society of judgment and decision-making as someone who studies psychology of decision-making. So it's perfectly natural to judge. And in the book, I talk about the fact that many people are reticent to judge because they view it as gauche. Who am I to judge? Who are we to judge? Now, that's an injunction from the New Testament, but it refers to not being a moral hypocrite, right? Don't judge others if you are committing the sin yourself. You know, people who cast stones from a glass house and so on. But that doesn't mean that we never judge. I judge those who engage in reprehensible acts. It's perfectly part of our repertoire of human behavior.
Of course, it makes it very difficult for me because I'm kind of stuck in this world where conversations like this normally would involve me trying to catch you out or, trying to have a go at you. But what I want to do is really get the most out of where your mind is and how it works. And I wonder, in the sense that you say in the Parasitic Mind that, we're basically capitulating. We're surrendering our opinions to the woke culture and to political correctness. What's wrong in your mind with that particular approach of at least accepting it?
Right. So each of those parasitic ideas that I talk about in the book, and maybe it's worth that I mention what some of those ideas are.
Please.
So postmodernism is the granddaddy of all parasitic ideas because it purports that there are no universal truths. We are completely shackled by subjectivity. So to speak of an objective truth is completely nonsensical, according to the postmodernists. Cultural relativism is an offshoot of that. It says, who are you to judge absolute moral truths, right? If another culture wants to cut off the clitorises of little girls, that's their business. Don't be a cultural imperialist. Social constructivism is another parasitic idea. It basically says we're not biological creatures. Everything is due to social construction. So if Bubba can bench press more than Linda, it must be because his parents taught him to play rough and tumble. It can't be because there are physiological, hormonal, morphological differences between men and women. Now, each of these parasitic ideas originally started off from a noble place. So take, for example, trans activism, right? Yes, of course, trans people should live free of bigotry. That doesn't mean in the service of that goal, we end up murdering and raping truth. So that, yes, if a 6'4", 280-pound guy decides that he's Linda tomorrow, who are you to judge whether he's not really Linda? So no, I do judge people who, in the service of an original noble goal, decide to kill truth.
You see these ideas to explain the parasitic mind as basically parallel to biological parasites.
Exactly. Yeah. So let me give you. Yeah.
Please,
So earlier I mentioned memes. Memes are not the same as the neuroparasitological framework that I took, and let me explain why. A meme could be positively valenced, neutral, or negatively valenced. A parasitic idea is inherently negative, right? And the reason why I chose the neuroparasitological framework comes from the animal kingdom. So in nature, the field of parasitology is the study of host-parasite interaction. So for example, you could be parasitized by a tapeworm that takes over your intestinal tract. A neuroparasite is one that seeks to end up in the host's brain, altering its neuronal circuitry to suit its reproductive interest. So for example, a wood cricket abhors water. When it is parasitized by a hairworm, the hairworm needs it to jump into water in order to complete its reproductive cycle. And so that was my epiphany. Aha, I will now use that framework to argue that human beings could be parasitized by actual physical brainworms, but also ideological brainworms, and hence the parasitic mind.
Why do you think humans are so vulnerable to these idea pathogens?
Well, I love that you asked it that way, because I've often been asked, is the parasitic mind something that is specific to the current period? And my answer is no. The capacity for the human mind to be parasitized is an indelible part of the architecture of the human mind. What is specific to the current period are the specific parasitic ideas that are taking over. 300 years ago, it was perfectly a good idea if we thought that our neighbor Linda was a witch to throw her into the body of water. And if she swims, then we know she's a witch. And if she drowns, oops, I guess we were wrong. That's a parasitic idea. Mm-hmm. So there are many reasons for that. One of which is, as I said earlier, it helps us get through difficulties in life. For example, some people argue that religion itself, Daniel Dennett, the famous evolutionary philosopher, argued that religion is akin to a parasite. So there are a wide variety of reasons why we are susceptible to this parasitic thinking.
I'll get on to religion a little bit later because it's something you touch on quite a bit. But I'm guessing from what you say, even a good leader or someone who's a great orator essentially is infecting everyone.
Well, I mean, that's Machiavelli, right? Machiavelli said it doesn't matter if the leader is truly an honest person. What matters is that you manage That's why when you say, for example, someone has Machiavellian intelligence, a salesperson who has high Machiavellian intelligence, what is he or she doing? They are tailoring their sales pitch as a function of the customer that they're standing next to, right? That's what a politician does. That's why when politicians are on the campaign, you always see them with a baby. Why? Because that shows that I am nurturing, I am kind, I am compassionate, right? You never see them with babies unless it's about 7 days before the election cycle. So of course, it's all about this kind of impression management.
And I guess dating sites, the person always has a puppy.
A puppy, or I've actually joked once, but it's based on actual science. If you hold a puppy, if you hold a guitar, and you come out of a Porsche wearing a fireman uniform, sit back and enjoy the ladies.
Fair enough. You've alluded to the issues that you are concerned with in the parasitic mind. What do you think are the three biggest risks facing us because of the parasitic mind?
And so the answer to that is also picked up in my forthcoming book called Suicidal Empathy,
Right,
which touch on that. Look, it causes us to take certain public policy decisions that are deeply problematic. On a smaller scale, although an important one, it causes about 900 medals to be given. This was an actual study that commissioned by the United Nations, because people say, well, what's the big deal about this transgender thing? Well, there've been almost, and that's an underestimate, 900 medals in major competitions that have been given to biological males, and hence real biological women have lost those places on the podium. So in a small scale, you get this kind of consequence. But how about unchecked illegal immigration? What does that do to the vitality of a society? I mean, economically, it certainly doesn't help. How about if it changes the fabric of that society? How about if you let in millions of people who don't share your foundational values? You're going to irrevocably change the nature of that society. So there are a wide range of consequences, most of them negative, that come about if we allow these parasitic ideas to flourish. By the way, the perfect manifestation of someone who is both a manifestation of a parasitized mind and suicidally empathetic is our current Prime Minister.
Oh, we're here in Canada.
In Canada,
okay,
yes,
right.
sir.
Well, we can touch on the politics in a moment. But the reason I'm asking it in this way is that you talk about, say, immigration, for example.
Sure.
It sounds like it's a broad, sweeping brush when you apply the idea to immigration. People forget the nuances, and that is that there are benefits from immigration. I mean,
of course.
In the US, they're going crazy in the agricultural sector now because they've lost all the workers. So how do you balance not overgeneralizing
right.
In such a way that it's counterproductive?
Right. It just has to be common sense, right? I'm an immigrant, so oftentimes people will write to me and say, you're such a hypocrite. You rail against open door immigration, but you're an immigrant yourself, and your buddy Elon Musk is an immigrant. So why are you railing against immigration? That's like arguing that my little cat, house cat Fido, is a feline, and the lion in the jungle is a feline. Therefore, since they're both feline, you should also go to the jungle and cuddle up with the lion in the jungle. Immigration has to be pursued in such a way that it always leads to a net benefit to the host society. If that criterion is met, then come in, my brother, and let's build a more pluralistic society together. If you allow entry to millions of people who are coming in for no other reason than you being empathetic, it's not going to result in good outcomes.
One of the things you wrote in The Parasitic Mind, to quote you, is that progressivism has become the enemy of reason. And you talk about, I love this term, the land of progressive unicornia, referring to unicorns, a mythical but admired creature. Why do you feel that progressivism is the enemy as such? Isn't there room for some understanding?
Because it is always rooted in this hopeful ethos. So take, for example, social constructivism, which basically says we're born tabula rasa with equal potentiality. And the only reason that Lionel Messi became Lionel Messi or Albert Einstein became Albert Einstein is because of a particular schedule of reinforcement, some socialization. Maybe his parents hugged him a lot, or maybe they didn't hug him enough, or maybe they took him to McDonald's enough, or maybe not enough. It can't be because there is innate differences in potentiality across people. Because here what the progressives are mixing up is equality under the law with equal potentiality. Now, it's very hopeful for me to think that all of my children have the potential to become the next Lionel Messi if only I find the right schedule of hugging. But the reality is My children are unlikely to become NBA players because I'm a short Jewish guy. Okay, the genes are already working again. Now there are some short guys that ended up in the NBA, but the statistics are against you. So me recognizing that there are certain biological realities is harder to swallow than the progressive unicornia that says, given the right schedule, we will all be beautiful. Socialism is a wonderful idea if you're 3 years old, because I teach my kindergarten kid that sharing is caring. It's inherently unfair that Elon Musk has more money than the guy who's homeless, right? Wouldn't it be better if benevolent government comes in and it creates equality? That's what Kamala Harris told us. Well, socialism and communism have been tried in endless countries. They've always failed. Why? Because unicornia is inconsistent with human nature. I'll tell you a quick quote that I think you'll love. E.O. Wilson, are you familiar with E.O. Wilson?
I don't recognize the name.
E.O. Wilson was a Harvard biologist
Okay.
who recently passed away, one of the great scientists of the 20th century. His specialty was social ants. He was an entomologist who studied social ants. Now, in social ant colonies, it actually is communistic. There is a reproductive queen, and then there's a bunch of worker ants and a bunch of warrior ants that are completely indistinguishable from each other. So when he was asked in an interview, Professor Wilson, what are your thoughts on communism? His answer was, great idea, wrong species, right? So what the progressives are doing, they're saying, we will impose our beautiful, rosy view of unicornia to a species that hasn't evolved to be consistent with that unicornia. So no, I think it's a bad idea to succumb to these ideas.
So essentially, it sounds like you're saying the land of progressive unicornia ignores basic science.
Exactly. It ignores the most fundamental features of our evolved human nature. Here's a great example from, so I teach at a business school. So many years ago, there was a company that decided that they wanted to break free of the antiquated notions of toxic masculinity. In what context? Romance novels are almost exclusively read by women around the world, right? I mean, literally almost exclusively. And I'm about to describe to you the exact same male protagonist that's been depicted in every romance novel ever written. You ready? He's a count. He's got some royal title. He's a neurosurgeon. He's tall. He's bold. He's aggressive. He wrestles alligators on a ab pack, but he could only be tamed by the love of this one woman. I just gave you the plagiarized version of every single romance novel that has ever existed. Why is that? Because women fantasize about a particular type of male archetype. It's part of their innate human nature. Now, this progressive unicornia company came along and said, we want to break free of this toxic masculinity. So they're going to come up with a guy that cries a lot, sucks his thumbs, goes in a fetal position, is pear-shaped, has a whiny voice, he's very sweet and sensitive. Guess what happened to that line? The market said, I don't want it. So you thought that you had the chutzpah to impose what you want consumers to read, and consumers said, no, no, no. I come with an endowed human nature, and I decide what I want to fantasize about. So there are real consequences to approaching political systems or consumer products with a lack of an understanding of human nature.
You reserve quite a lot of ire in your book for what you call the SJW, social justice warriors. Explain that concept.
So the social justice warrior is typically someone who is very much entrenched in sort of progressive unicornia. I even give an example of a type of social justice warrior with a spicy term. Do you know where I'm going with this? Male feminists as sneaky. Do you remember what the last part is? Sneaky effers. Sneaky.
Okay.
Okay. Now, that term, sneaky effer, actually comes from science. It's so in the 1970s, the official scientific term is kleptogamy, which is the stealing of mating opportunities. But the colloquial term, even within the scientific literature, is a sneaky effer. So example, you have many species where the males, there are two phenotypes of male. There's the traditional male who is, very masculine and so on. There is another type of phenotype of a male that mimics females. So when the big dominant male sees this one, it dupes him into thinking that he is a female and then goes around and surreptitiously engages in mating opportunities. So I took this principle from the animal kingdom And I argued that human male feminists, social justice warriors, are adopting the sneaky effort strategy.
I remember this now, yeah.
I'm very, very kind. I hug the trees. When I put gas into my car, I start crying because I am raping Mother Earth with the devil's juice and so on. And so I'm very kind. You could trust me, Linda. You don't have to worry about me. I'm a kind and compassionate person. I'm a sneaky effort.
How do you propose to protect those who are genuinely vulnerable? Because we can't all be that archetypal, super strong alligator wrestling type. There are those who need, to some degree, I guess, support and protection. So how does it not kind of dissolve into this, as you say, unicornia kind of perspective?
Look, I'm not suggesting that empathy is something that should be eradicated. We are a multifaceted creature, right? We can be ruthlessly violent, and we can be infinitely kind and loving, right? She's not on camera right here, but my daughter is here. I would be willing to jump in front of a truck to save her life, right? So that allows me to have empathy, have love, have unlimited compassion for the right targets, right? But on the other, the problem is when you take these virtues and they misfire. So I don't know if we want to talk about suicidal empathy later, but maybe
we'll talk about it after. But carry on.
Yeah.
Carry on.
So suicidal empathy is simply the misfiring of an otherwise adaptive emotion. So let me draw an analogy. OCD is a psychiatric disorder, right? But at its root, it is based on something that is quite evolutionarily advantageous. The idea of scanning the environment for potential threats makes perfect evolutionary sense. But for most of us, once we have tended to that threat, it then goes away. So for example, if you and I shake hands and I notice that a minute before you shook my hand, you sneezed into your hand, I might later quietly go into the bathroom and wash my hands. I wash my hands once and then I resume our interaction. The OCD sufferer will be stuck in an infinite loop for the next 8 hours, washing their hands until their skin is falling off in scalding hot water. So it is a misfiring of an otherwise adaptive process. So yes, be empathetic, be kind, be generous, be compassionate. Those are all part of the repertoire of human realities, but it has to be properly regulated.
What you refer to, though, in the Parasitic Mind is something that's very interesting, and I think a lot of people recognize this based on what we see in the media, and that is the faux outrage, false outrage.
Exactly. So, and here I can link it, if you like, very quickly to an evolutionary principle. So for a signal to be meaningful, it has to be costly. And let me explain what I mean by that. You take a peacock's tail, right? The peacock's tail could not have evolved via natural selection. Natural selection is the mechanism that confers survival advantage for that trait to have evolved. Well, when the peacock evolves that big tail, it is burdensome, it makes it more conspicuous to predators, it makes it more difficult to take flight. So why would evolution have resulted in the evolution of such a burdensome tail? Well, there we talk about sexual selection. Some traits evolve because they confer a reproductive advantage. So even though it is handicapping me from a survival perspective, I am communicating to the peahens, the females of that species, despite the fact that I've got this very burdensome tail, I am still here. Shouldn't you choose me as your mate? How am I going to link this to what you just asked? Putting hashtag bring the girls home, putting hashtag refugees welcome, love is love, and all the other nonsense, is costless. So it's not an honest signal. It's a faux signal. Any of us can meet it. But if I speak openly in some regions of the Middle East, where I know I might be taken into the back corner and a bullet is put through my head, that is a costly signal. That is true signaling and not virtue signaling.
I remember the section where you were saying basically choose me when it came to peacocks and peahens, but it made me also wonder, you use this term, it's just an aside that just occurred to me, this term testicular fortitude quite a bit in the book. And that made me think, well, what about the women?
Yes. Well, here I use it in a sort of hyperbolic sense. Right. Margaret Thatcher has more testicular fortitude than most men alive today in the West. Right. So it applies equally to both sexes. Or if I were a transgender activist, to the 680 different genders.
When it comes to making decisions, I know you say there's a danger in prioritizing feelings over facts.
Yes, sir.
But isn't part of the problem that people don't really know what the facts are anymore? That, they're so busy looking for confirmation bias.
Yeah, that's true. Let me discuss first the tension between feelings and thought.
Please.
It's a false dichotomy. It's not that we are an animal of reason rather than an animal of feeling. We are both, right? The challenge is to know when to invoke the right system at the right time. So if I'm walking down in a dark alley because I'm taking a shortcut to get home, and then I notice four young men who are loitering, I will get a fear-based response. My heart will start racing. I will start breathing heavier. My blood pressure will go up. All of these things have triggered my emotional-based system, and it makes perfect evolutionary sense for that to have happened. On the other hand, if I'm trying to do well on a calculus exam, triggering my emotional system is not going to make me do a better job on the calculus exam. Now, I apply that example when it comes to, say, choosing our political leaders. Regrettably, most people end up invoking their affective system rather than their cognitive system. And so here I talk about it, actually an expression from Arabic says that getting drunk by simply smelling the cork of the wine bottle.
Right.
Because what that basically says, I don't need to actually drink the wine to get drunk. I just take a whiff and I'm already, right? So it refers to someone who has a weak cognitive constituency, right? So for example, if you ask people, why do you love Obama? Well, he's tall, he's lanky, he's got a mellifluous voice, he's got a radiant smile. It could well be that every single syllable he utters is complete rubbish, but I'm already getting drunk by his cork. On the other hand, why do you hate Donald Trump? Well, he's cantankerous, he speaks like a brawler from New York, he's not presidential, but you didn't say anything about whether you agree with his immigration policy or his fiscal policy. So the reason why I discussed that tension is because many of the problems that we face is because we trigger the wrong system at the wrong time. Regarding your issue of what do we know what is true or not, well, one thing I could tell you is that there shouldn't be a government agency that decides for us what is true or not. I don't know if you remember under the Biden administration, there was a woman, Nina something, that came out who was going to be the first official czar of disinformation. I mean, Orwell couldn't have come up with such a ridiculous notion. Do you remember her?
Vaguely, but I was thinking though, the issue is partly that with politics, the scene has become distorted anyway.
Right. Well, and look, for example, in science, once you utter the words, these two words, settled science, you understand nothing about science, because science deals in provisional truths. Yes, right. There is a truth, but that truth can move. What we thought was true, I mean, the Copernican revolution was about people thinking one way about the cosmos, and then Copernicus and Galileo came along and said, no, that's not how it works. So the idea that it's settled science, and therefore we need to remove your YouTube channel, we need to get you off of Twitter because you are espousing false beliefs. Is it disinformation to say that men menstruate, or is it veridical information? So this whole idea of we tell you what the facts are is a terribly Orwellian, dangerous idea.
I'll get on to how this has been affected by social media and the mainstream media as we progress. But what I was getting at also is, isn't it now that in the case with politics, it is more about smelling the cork than actually listening to what the real policy should be?
And I think there is a reason for that. Look, we face a lot of computational complexity in our everyday life, right? Imagine if I sat there aching about every single decision by looking at every single piece of information that is relevant before I decide which restaurant to go to or which car to purchase. Then I would be stuck in choice paralysis, right? So I use what are called decision rules or heuristics that allows me to cut through the clutter, right? And so, for example, when people evoke their affective system, that's a very quick shortcut, right? Because it allows me to say, look, how do I feel about Obama? He's lovely and majestic. How do I feel about Trump? He seems mean and cantankerous. Good enough, right? Because it cuts through the clutter. Now, it's a suboptimal way of making decisions, but it is a very quick way to navigate through the computational complexity.
When it comes to it, in your opinion, which is more important, truth or freedom? And who wins when they clash? For example, if you have people, putting out, because of free speech, putting out falsehoods, disinformation, and so on in the media?
It's very hard to put a ordinal ranking on which one requires the other in an infinite loop, right? I can't I can't pursue truth if I don't have the freedom to pursue truth, and vice versa, right? So that's what and I'm glad you raised those two, because I'm guessing you're referring to the Parasitic Mind, where in chapter 1 I say that the two fundamental ideals that that inform my life are truth and freedom, right? I don't think you can have one without the other, right? I have to have the complete freedom to be able to pursue truth where it takes me, which, by the way, leads to a very dangerous idea, forbidden knowledge, which I briefly referred to in the Parasitic Mind, and I pick up again in Suicidal Empathy. Forbidden knowledge is the idea that there are some inquiries that we should refrain from pursuing because the consequences would be too great to pursue them, right? Now, and if I may, let me explain here the concept of deontological versus consequentialist ethics. Deontological ethics is absolute statements. It is never okay to lie, would be a deontological statement. A consequentialist statement would be, it's okay to lie if you're trying to spare someone's feelings. And so I often joke that if you want to have a long, happy marriage,
I remember, yeah.
you're right, and your spouse says, "Do I look fat in those jeans?" Put on your consequentialist hat and say, "You've never looked more beautiful." You're lying, perhaps, but that is a consequentialist lie. For most things in life, it is perfectly reasonable for us to be consequentialists. For freedom of speech, for the pursuit of truth, for journalistic integrity, those are by definition deontological statements. So if you say, yes, pursue truth, but don't hurt people's feelings, the but there is a big problem.
Professor, from where do you get your news? How do you make sure you're getting what you would consider accurate?
Wow, what a great question. It's really a collection of stuff. Some of it TV, some of it I read, some of it is just the scrolling through X. So I don't have a single one-stop shop place. It's a bit of but what I try to do is triangulation of the veracity of information. Do you see what I mean by that?
Yeah. I always say that there's a triangle: information plus diversity leads to perspective.
Right. There you go.
But the thing is, are you constantly aware of the risk of an echo chamber? Constantly trying to validate your own thoughts, because you're obviously quite forceful in your thoughts. There's a risk you could always be seeking validation.
Albeit, if you, for example, will look at some of my now I have a lot of followers, so I can't give you an empirical estimate, but I can oftentimes have on my feed 2 people that just responded to something that I posted, and they couldn't be more diametrically opposed from each other. Now, I actually take that with some encouragement, meaning that if every time I post something, everybody always agreed with me, then probably I've created an echo chamber. But if, just with one post, I can have 20 people, 14 of whom agreed with me, 6 who haven't, then I think I'm building a diversified chamber.
So I used to give this example that if I covered the Israeli-Palestinian situation, and I would have people from both sides, but either way, no matter how I did the debate or the conversation, I would get viewer feedback saying, "Oh, you're so pro-Palestinian," for the same show where they said, "You're so pro-Israeli." And my producer would say, "How can that be?" I said, "Well, my explanation was people bring their own baggage
exactly
when they're watching, and that's why I ask in your case how you kind of put your mind outside that potential echo chamber."
So I'll give you an example of confirmation bias that my former doctoral supervisor had told me many years ago. So he had been hired to help some company. He's a cognitive psychologist and consumer specialist at Cornell. He just recently retired, by the way. So he had been hired by a company where half the executives seemed to be for a product launch and the other half seemed to be deadly set against the product launch. And so what was going to break the tie is they were going to bring a bunch of them, put them in a focus group, and then based on that interaction, either one side would win or one side or the other side would win. After that interaction happened, then you polled both sides. Both sides said, "You see, we won." Now, how could it be? How could it be that they both saw the exact same interaction and arrived at exactly the opposite confirmation, right? Well, it's exactly to your point, which is I only look for information that supports my position, and I filter out perceptually and cognitively any information that doesn't agree with my position, and therefore I solidify my anchored position. I was recently asked on a show by a British psychiatrist, this was about a year ago, at the end of the show, maybe the best question I've ever been asked, maybe you'll beat it on this show. He said, what is the singular phenomenon that, you know, you've seen in the human condition in your 30 plus years as a professor that has most surprised you? So I had to pause for a second. And then I said, the inability for most people to change their anchored positions, irrespective of the amount of conflicting evidence that they might be shown, which itself, and that's why, by the way, in chapter 7 of the Parasitic Mind, I try to offer a means by which we can break through that resistance. I talk about nomological networks of cumulative evidence, which we could talk about. So I'm mindful of even my capacity to succumb to this kind of echo chamber. That's why I try to sample from many different sources.
How do you regard conspiracy theories? You know, the moon landing wasn't real, or that there are chips in vaccines during COVID, these kind of things that are out there. How do you regard them?
I apply the scientific method, right? So I think there is now enough evidence that the Holocaust did happen. So if you're a Holocaust denier who argues that, you know, it was all Hollywood made and there were no ovens and so on, I don't have to take it seriously, because I know the accumulation of evidence has already established that that thing happened. And so you just apply the scientific method as you navigate between what is true or false. There's no other way to do it.
It's difficult, though, with things like the moon landing. It doesn't have the same empirical basis as the Holocaust, for example.
That is true. That is true. But by the way, I mean, I don't know if it's the right time to do it, but maybe it is. Do you want me to talk about how you do the nomological networks?
Please do, yeah.
So in a sense, it speaks to your general question. How do you seek truth? How do you know what's true, what's not true? And so in chapter 7, the chapter's titled How to Seek Truth, I argue that there is an incredibly powerful, albeit very cognitively taxing, method to try to decide whether something is true or not. So let's take, for example, I give several examples in the chapter, but I'll discuss one here. Let's suppose I wanted to counter the idea that social constructivists offer that toy preferences are sex-specific due to socialization. Meaning it's because mommy taught Linda to play with the doll and taught Bobby to play with the truck. That's why they have those preferences. Let's suppose I wanted to demonstrate to you that that's not true. There are universal biological and evolutionary based reasons for those sex-specific toy preferences. How would I go about doing that? So I'm going to build a nomological network of cumulative evidence, meaning I'm going to get you data from across cultures, across time periods, across species, across methodologies, that will triangulate to demonstrate that this position is unassailable. So, and I'll give a few examples. Well, from developmental psychology, we know that young infants who are too young to yet be socialized, by definition, they don't have the cognitive apparatus to be socialized, already exhibit those sex-specific toy preferences. So that already takes out the socialization argument. I can get you data from vervet monkeys, rhesus monkeys, and chimpanzees showing that they have the same sex-specific toy preferences. I can get you data from sub-Saharan Africa, where cultures that are very non-Western, they exhibit the same sex-specific toy preferences. I could go back 2,500 years ago, showing you that in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, on funerary monuments, little boys and girls are depicted playing with exactly the same types of toys as we have today. So look how I am putting the epistemological noose around your neck. I don't have to emote louder than you. I don't have to scream louder than you. If I can have this, you know, gargantuan triangulation of evidence, I'll let that do the talking for me. And so that's why, by the way, I'm epistemologically quite humble in that I know what I know, and I know what I don't know. That's why I never get caught in interviews. I give thousands of interviews because I'll never try to wing it. If you ask me a question that I think that I haven't done the requisite nomological network for, I'll say, hey, Riz, you know, that's a great question. It's above my pay grade. I don't know. Right. But if I know, good luck to you if you want to debate me.
Fair enough. No, because a lot of people obviously want to try to catch you out. Yeah. But if you know your stuff, that's obviously going to be important. But it was interesting because you did say people who spew falsehoods should be judged. Now that stuck with me with Parasitic
Judge.
Mind.
That doesn't mean imprisoned.
No, I didn't. I realized what you meant. It was the whole chapter on us taking a position and so on, which is why I started asking you about my situation as a journalist. Because of course, as a human being, I have in my head judgments and opinions, but I really, difficult as it is, I enforce them in terms of my journalistic work. I want to stand away and hear the story. So many people would say that politicians in general happily lie. And in the case of Donald Trump, who I know you do like, as a politician. He regularly is accused of lying, and people actually, metrically record this. How do you reconcile your belief then about his veracity
Right.
with
Yes,
that
very good.
documentation?
So there are lies and then there are lies. So Donald Trump lies about, I've got the biggest penis in the world. I'm the greatest lover in the history of humanity. The biggest audience was ever at my inauguration, right? They're ego defensive lies, right? So is he fibbing? Undoubtedly. That is a very different lie than if you are a postmodernist saying that there are no objective truths. That eradicates the possibility of truth being. And it's that allows them to say slavery is freedom, war is peace, men are women. So lies don't all come in the same final shape, right? Is he lying in the sense that he's constantly trying to protect his ego because he's a benign narcissist? Yes. But they are guys on the progressive side that are lying. If you say, for example, that socialism is the means by which people are most likely to flourish, that is a much more consequential lie than I am the best lover of all time. Both are lies. One is much bigger than the other.
But he does have those consequential ones too. They're eating the cats and dogs in Springfield, Illinois, and so on. People react to this.
Yeah, okay. In that case, I think it's the fog of the rapidity of how information comes about, right? I think, though, and Elon Musk recently said it, he said, look, we will put out stuff often and it'll turn out to be false, in which case we're happy to correct our position. So just have the epistemological humility to accept that sometimes you'll get it wrong.
True. No, I heard him say that. He was actually in the White House as he said it.
Exactly.
Now, the question is this, though. If putting out this information without checking its veracity in the first place, there are consequences, the risks are great. That's right. So from your side, how do you rationalize that with saying someone like this is worth the leadership position?
Because I think all politicians lie, as you said. The question is, which one is the lesser of a liar? I don't think that when I put my imprimatur in supporting a particular candidate, I think that they are interchangeable with a saint, right? I think that given these options, this is probably the better option. So given the types of values that are important to me, it is incontestable to me that Donald Trump would have been a much better choice than Kamala Harris.
All right, you're picking between those candidates, but I'm talking in a general sense with politicians.
They all lie.
I was going to say, so in the sense of Donald Trump, you see him as something of a cure. As you said in a recent essay, you wrote about his election victory saying, it's an unequivocal repudiation of the ideological parasites that have wreaked havoc on our societies.
Yes.
And if, as you also say, it took decades of assiduous indoctrination for these parasitic ideas to flourish in every nook and cranny of our institutions, we'll get onto those further. Yeah. How can 4 years of a Trump presidency turn them around? You've said it, it takes decades.
That's a fantastic question. It's actually one that I keep hammering now with people, that don't be complacent in thinking that just because Donald Trump, he came along, he's got the polio vaccine, he administers it everywhere, and polio ceases to exist. To your point, what you just mentioned, it took, depending on the parasitic idea, it's taken between 50 to 100 years for these idea pathogens to develop originally on university campuses and then to break out of the university. So it won't be sufficient to only kind of rest on our laurels to say, hey, Donald Trump is here, we've eradicated this nonsense. That's why even I've had people who say to me, so now that Donald Trump has come to power, will people even read Suicidal Empathy? I say, of course they will, because these parasitic ideas have not gone away. The reflex to be suicidally empathetic is not going to magically go away because this guy came into office for 4 years. The next president might be one that is as committed to these parasitic ideas, and off we go on the woke train. So there's much more in the fight to be had.
I want to get your perspective on this as someone who's actually a couple of years younger than me, but around the same kind of age. For me, it seemed like there was a massive change in the curve where this suddenly all became public. I don't remember these kind of debates for the last, say, 40, 45 years.
Because you weren't in academia. So it takes a while for all of these. So for example, take shingles. The virus is within you, it's dormant, and then something will trigger it such that you might get an outbreak and I don't. But it is in there. So what you were reacting to is the fact that you didn't know that shingles was, flourishing in the background, whereas I was living in the petri dish of shingles. called academia. So, and let me give you the background of how I first was exposed to, oh, Houston, we have a problem. So my scientific work originally was in the application of evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology and studying human behavior in general and consumer behavior and economic behavior in particular. And so as I tried to Darwinize the business school, the idea being that you can't study entrepreneurship or leadership or consumer behavior or economic behavior without ever invoking our biological nature. To me, that seemed like a very banal and obvious statement. Well, apparently it was completely heretical to most of my academic colleagues. And so I was right, that was my first exposure to parasitic ideas. How could these otherwise bright, educated people be questioning the fact that human beings, consumers are biological? You don't think our hormones affect our behavior? How? Right? And so I saw it, but it took a while for other people who were not inhabiting that ecosystem to then hit them. And that to me is frustrating, because had people listened when I stood up on top of the mountain and saying we have a problem, then we wouldn't have had to have 900 medals being stolen by trans women. You see what I mean?
I hear you. Yeah.
I appeared in 2017. I appeared in front of the Canadian Senate. I was summoned, as was Jordan Peterson, separately, to talk about Bill C-16, which at the time was a bill that hadn't passed yet, trying to incorporate gender identity and gender expression under the hateful rubric umbrella. And I said, yeah, of course, I support the idea that no person should face any bigotry, but beware of the proverbial slippery slope. Now, if you go back and you listen to my warnings, I hate to say it, but they were prophetic.
How do you regard the way, well, this also occurred to me, the word political correctness came in, I don't know what, maybe 15, 20 years ago that I could really remember. And suddenly all the parameters changed. I couldn't put on an African accent, for example. I certainly couldn't, if I was an actor, go on, blacken my face and appear as an African. When that all started to emerge, how did you regard that?
I was very concerned by it, because I saw the kind of stifling environment it created in otherwise banal interactions on campuses. So people were, I mean, I remember at one point someone asked me, this was probably about 10 years ago, oh, where are you from originally? And I was about to answer. I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I know that I'm not supposed to ask that. I said, what do you mean you're not supposed to ask that? You recognize that I don't look as though I'm indigenous to Canada because I have a particular morphological look. What's the problem with you asking where I come from originally? So I've noticed that for a while. I compare it, and you might remember this from the Parasitic Mind. The parasitic wasp stings a much bigger spider, rendering it zombified, and then it takes it to its burrow, lays its eggs on it, and then its eggs, as they hatch, eat the spider in vivo while it's alive. And so I argue that political correctness is akin to the spider wasp sting, because it stultifies me, right? I'm now afraid to say, I recognize that you don't look French Canadian. So what if I were to say, Mr. Khan, where are you from? How is that an insult? But that's what happens with political correctness. It removes our ability to have natural dynamics.
Just an aside, I tend to say, what are your roots?
What are your roots?
I find it kind of safer. And this is the issue. Aren't there so many landmines now onto which we can easily step?
Not if you're called Gad Saad. I mean, I don't give a shit. You know, there's a, and I invoke this in chapter 8 of the Parasitic Mind. I say, activate your inner honey badger. Right? The honey badger, for the viewers and listeners who may not know, has been literally ranked as the most ferocious and fierce animal in the animal kingdom, which is saying a lot. There are a lot of ferocious animals in the animal kingdom. The reason, it's the size of a small dog. It is so fierce that adult lions will stay clear of it, right? That's why there's the expression, honey badgers don't give an F. I live my life this way, maybe to a fault, and I wish more people would invoke.
Well, you end the book basically saying evoke your honey badger. You know?
Exactly.
How do you regard Andrew Tate? I interviewed him at his home in Romania.
Yeah, I've never interacted with him. I don't know much about him. I mean, he seems maybe not to my aesthetic taste in terms of his delivery, like kind of the bro stuff. some of his and I'm hardly one who can't engage in locker room talk, right? I mean, I was literally a soccer player myself, so it's not as though I'm a dainty Puritan madam, but he seems a bit too harsh for me, for my
He's
taste.
had a lot of influence, especially on young men.
On young men, yes.
You know, in the approach to some of the things you talk about, you can't refute facts like, you know, men are physiologically stronger than women and so on. I think that's why I was curious in case you'd come across.
I mean, he certainly will say some things that are backed by evolutionary science, if not common sense. But I think the style of how he does it is a bit problematic. What did you think of him? Did you enjoy interacting with him?
Yeah, it was actually interesting talking with him because, again, I think he's used to people engaging him for an argument.
Yes.
And he had to stop and think when I just asked an innocent question.
Right.
So, you know, I'm going to go back to Donald Trump just for a couple more questions. Joe Rogan, someone with whom you've appeared a number of times now, has been very influential. How much do you think he played a role in tipping the scale in favor of Donald Trump?
Huge. As a matter of fact, before he had appeared with Joe Rogan, I was in touch with Trump's people about him coming on my show, which is a much smaller show than, I mean, I'm a popular guy, but I'm not Joe Rogan popular. And when they had asked me, what would be your idea of, you know, what would you want to get out of it? I said, well, you know what I'd love? Just to sit with him and to humanize him so that the people who are on the fence can actually see he's a funny guy. He's got a great sense of humor. He's a regular. He could, you know, just shoot the blank, right? Well, that's exactly what ended up happening when he went for 3 hours on Joe Rogan, which, of course, at that point, once he's done Joe Rogan, there's no point on coming on my show. He's done the biggest show. But so to your question, I think it really helped to humanize him because so often his interactions are ones where he's put on the back foot, where he's defensive, whereas here he's calm, he's relaxed. There's no gotcha stuff. With just two guys chatting, I think it probably flipped a few people who were fence sitting.
How do you feel he's done so far now, about a month into the presidency as we're talking?
I don't think, I mean, as you said, I'm a bit younger than you. I can't think of a 4-week period where a president did more stuff than this guy has done.
Is it good stuff?
Well, you tell me, is there some bad stuff? Is there some stuff?
Well, I'm asking you really because I'm essentially just taking the position of getting your perspective on this.
Yeah, so far, I haven't seen anything that has caused me great alarm. He got rid of all the Title IX stuff where biological males can enter female spaces. That's good. He's trying to cut down on you know, open border immigration. I think that's good. He's trying to reduce the excessive waste and corruption through Doge. That's good. So far, I think I'm happy.
Okay, because some would say there's been some backfiring, firing all those people, you know, in the government who now suddenly have to be re-recruited because it's overdone. The Gaza Riviera. You know,
that's a bit of Trump bombast. I'm not sure if I would have approached it exactly the same way, but that again is, I think, stylistic, right? He's a great negotiator. It could well be that he says that without literally meaning that because he's trying to angle for a better negotiation position. So I can't pretend to know what's exactly in his mind, but I can see how the optics of such a proposal could irk a lot of people the wrong way.
Now, in the Parasitic Mind, you talked about an analogy where there's an elderly woman being attacked in an alleyway.
Yes.
And you could be one of two sorts of people. The one who goes in and helps or the one who kind of walks away and avoids getting involved. And you said, be the first. You can get involved. Some might say with what's just happened, as we're talking again with the situation with Ukraine, he has now said, I'll go into Ukraine, but if we can have mineral rights. It's like, I'll help you, old lady, but as long as you give me some money from your purse.
Except, hasn't there been already a lot of the purse of the United States taxpayer given to Ukraine? So the question becomes, how far do you want to take this? I mean, how much are the American and frankly the Canadian taxpayers owing in the protection of Ukraine? If you are a strong isolationist, you'd say we've already spent way too much money. If you're a globalist, we haven't spent enough money. It depends on your perspective.
Talking of those close to the president, Elon Musk is also a fan of yours and your book.
Yes.
And he's certainly, you know, a lot of his decisions. I wonder, do you feel that he was shaped to some degree by what you wrote in The Parasitic Mind?
Well, there is an article that came out in Wall Street Journal about 7, 8 months ago, the title of the article, "The Man Who Fuels Elon Musk's Nightmares." Do you know who that man is? So,
Yeah.
so I suspect, I mean, it's hard to answer that question without being immodest, but certainly I probably
I'll have
played a
to look
hand.
for that. I missed that in my
Yeah,
research. But I mean, you said that Elon Musk should get the Nobel Prize.
I do.
In which field?
Well, we probably peace in the
Yeah.
sense that I mean, someone will probably correct me, but I would say probably within a week of him having purchased Twitter, I did a sad truth clip where I said, of all the things that Musk has done and anything that he will do in the future, none will be as historically consequential as him having bought X.
No, I remember you'd quoted that.
Exactly. And so the fact that he has freed many of us from the oversight of in French you say les bien-pensants, the good thinkers, the ones who are better, or as Thomas Sowell would say, the anointed ones. The fact that I can now go on a thing and even use the R word. You know what the R word is? Somebody says something really idiotic, I go, come on, man, are you retarded?
Oh,
And
right.
so
Yeah.
so that was completely a no-no. I mean, the only strike I ever got on former Twitter, I think it was maybe like a 7-day violation, was because I had used the R word. Real life cannot be sanitized in this way, right? When I was in the Lebanese Civil War, I didn't know if the next minute I was going to live or not. And that was my reality growing up. You can handle the R word.
How did you find Elon Musk as a person?
So we spent a lot of time together. He actually had invited me down to meet him at his house. We ended up spending maybe about 4 hours together. I found him to be incredibly engaging, very, very humble. I mean, we had communicated many times, but that was the first time that we had seen each other in person. Zero ego, just two guys. We literally hugged, sat there for 4 hours, completely locked in, sometimes discussing some very personal and intimate things, sometimes discussing about maintaining human consciousness via interplanetary travel. So sometimes it got very, esoteric and philosophical. Other times, as a matter, now I could say it because he's mentioned it himself. He told me that the original, trigger for him that got him into the woke mind virus was the reality that he faced with his own son, who became his daughter, right? At the time, I didn't know if that was public, so I never had mentioned it. But, he was confiding in me in a very trusting way, in a very intimate way. So I thought he was just absolutely lovely. I mean, he is an eccentric guy, but I've got nothing but positive affection for him.
He got some flack for doing the Roman salute, which is often compared with the Nazi salute.
This thing, yes.
As someone who's culturally Jewish, how did you feel about that?
Well, I said, I actually had right away tweeted, I don't know if you saw it, I said, I can't believe that I was able to spend all this time in the Grand Nazi's house, and as a Jew, I came out alive. Of course, I was mocking the idea that he is, pro-Nazi and so on. It's so silly, come on.
A lot of the stuff you write, actually, this was interesting to note, even in your book, that irony and satire gets lost on a lot of people.
Oh my God, it's unbelievable. Well, first, the power of irony and satire and sarcasm. So in the book, in The Parasitic Mind, I say that it is akin to the surgeon's scalpel cutting through warm butter, right? The reason why dictators go after the satirists first, they don't go after the guys with the big muscles. Those are easy to handle. But the guy who's got the sharp tongue, the guy who's got the sharp pen, hence the pen is mightier than the sword, that's the one that I'm scared of, because he's the one who could attack my ideology, my position, right? So he makes me scared. And so that's the reason why I use satire and sarcasm. But to your point, what amazes me is how often, usually it's somebody new who doesn't know my style, who I'll write something that is completely satirical, and then they will just start sending me endless hate mail, not realizing that I was being satirical.
With Dr. Gad Saad explaining how he believes the parasitic mind is shaping our world today. On the next episode of the conversation I had with him, I challenge his fears that Islam is a danger to the world.
Islam, though, is a set of ideas that are codified, and then we could say, does Islam promote greater personal liberties and freedoms? yes or no. There is only these answers. It's either yes or it's no, right? I would venture that based on historical facts, it doesn't promote greater personal liberties and freedoms. And so I can't be Islamophobic in saying that. It's a nonsensical term. I am a Islamo-realist.
Plus, a look at how suicidal empathy, also the title of his next book, will drag down the world order if it's not fully resisted now. Join us for that. But in the meantime, don't forget to leave your thoughts and comments, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time. A big thank you from me and the team for watching. I'm Riz Khan. See you soon.